Hey everybody, my name's Tatiana. Welcome back to the Bitcoin 101 show. I'm here with my friend Stephanie. She's helping me out. And in this video, we want to talk about what makes Bitcoin cool, what makes it so revolutionary. Now, we haven't been very political before because that's not what Bitcoin is about, right? But for us, we're very freedom-minded people. So that was a big thing that kind of brought us into Bitcoin. Maybe you want to start, Stephanie, about that?
To me, the coolest thing about Bitcoin is that it's just modern. It's keeping current with the times. As opposed to the banking system that we have to deal with, where it takes days sometimes to transfer money between accounts. People are mailing pieces of paper around, checks, that are saying, take some money out of my account and put it in this other person's account. Transactions can be denied if they're too large or if somebody thinks that they look suspicious. You have to give up a lot of personal information to open a bank account, and they can say no. With Bitcoin, you don't have any of those problems. Oh yeah, and don't forget fees too. Merchants deal with huge fees on processing credit card transactions, even wire transfers. I don't know if you've ever done one of those, Tatiana, but I have, and the fee is huge. It can be really unwieldy. And forget trying to send money by something like Western Union or another money transfer service. The fees can really eat into the money that you're sending, especially if it's a small amount. So we need a better system, obviously. And Bitcoin just takes care of all those problems. It's permissionless. You don't need to ask anyone's permission to send Bitcoin from one place to another. You can send it anywhere in the world. Geographic borders don't really factor in. It's instantaneous. The payee will receive the money immediately, and the fees are incredibly low. There's not zero fee, but you might pay a few cents or even less on each transaction that you send, regardless of how large it is. So in an age where you can send an email anywhere in the world and it gets there in a couple of seconds and no one can really say, no, you can't send that email, now you can do that with money too.
The things that I really like that you touched on is how you can send Bitcoin to anywhere in the world. Well, think about all these countries. They have these third world countries, they call them the unbanked. And when I heard about that, I said, what's the unbanked? Well, the unbanked are people who live in areas where there's no banking access. Now, as somebody who pays $20 a month for holding a bank account, obviously I'm like, good, I don't want a bank account, but actually I really need one, because how else am I going to transact business? How am I going to have people pay me? And if you're in the middle of nowhere, how are you going to function if you don't have a safe place to put your money? So one of the things that I really like about Bitcoin is the way that you can use it for charities. My friend Connie Glippy, she has BitGive, and BitGive can send money to anyone, anywhere, and they can send it faster, they can send it cheaper. So if you're a charity, that little margin, and sometimes a much larger margin, because if you're sending money to Africa, it's like 30% sometimes. That makes a really big difference. And even with carrying that money from place to place, so if somebody goes to a Western Union and they have their cash on them, they have to worry that somebody is going to mug them or something's going to happen to them on their way home. There's another charity called Code to Inspire, and when they send money to Afghan girls in Afghanistan, they can now keep that money private. Nobody can take that away from them unless, of course, they know that they're private keys, which is much less likely, instead of having somebody just walking around carrying a bunch of cash, again, that they could have taken from them.
In fact, that's really interesting that you mentioned Code to Inspire, because they are a organization that helps Afghan girls get education about computer science and teaches them how to code. Well, if they wanted to fund that operation with PayPal, they actually couldn't do that, or they couldn't accept donations from the U.S. because you actually can't send PayPal payments from the U.S. to several different countries around the world, Afghanistan being one of them. So with Bitcoin, they can transcend those limitations and enable a really cool charitable and social mission organization to flourish.
Another thing that I really like about Bitcoin is I always say that it's an anti-war currency. what happens a lot of times, since governments control currencies, is that when they want to go and have a war, they know that war is generally unpopular with the people, because at the end of the day, if a government wants to go in and invade another country, the people are the ones that have to pay for it. So instead of going to people and maybe asking them for the money through taxation, of
They're
course,
not
but
asking.
through taxation, people can say, okay, next time they're not going to vote for that guy because they took it out through their taxes. They can just print more money, and people end up paying for it later, but they don't even know that that's happening. So that's how so many countries have been able to become bigger war powers. I'm not selling any names here, but the USA. I mean, if you think about the history of the way that money has been controlled, that's been a really key source in how there can be a lot of death and destruction around the world, even though popular sentiment doesn't reflect that. Voting doesn't always solve everything, especially if somebody else is in control of the money. Now, whether or not you agree with that, that's fine. But at the end of the day, don't you think that you should be in charge of your money versus somebody else? And is it somebody else's business and somebody else's right to devalue what you have saved just because they want to? I mean, that's totally messed up. So I think that there's a lot of different things that people can do in terms of social good. That's kind of what I tie into Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime there's power concentrated into the hands of a few people, there is the potential for huge abuse of that power. And we see that time and time again, like you were talking with the currency inflation to fund wars and other government operations, or whether we're talking about banks that are just politically connected and are kind of pushing people around and giving them a service that doesn't really serve them super well. Anytime power is concentrated into the hands of a few people, it's potentially going to be abused. And with Bitcoin, you don't have that because it's decentralized. The power is not in the hands of a few people. There's no one in charge of Bitcoin. It's a Pandora's box that's been kind of unleashed on the world. It's created by an anonymous creator, which we didn't talk about before, but Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonym of an unknown person or persons who created Bitcoin, and then released it into the world and let it fly. There are people who are developers for Bitcoin who contribute to the Bitcoin code, but at the end of the day, nobody's in charge of Bitcoin, and that's good.
It doesn't necessarily have to replace any kind of currency. It's just good for there to be competition because, if you're, I don't know, the only girl in town, then, you can get a little chubby, you can be hanging out, you don't have to put on any makeup, you kind of just slack around. But now there's competition, you're like, oh, I got to step it up, I got to go, it's the beginning of the year now, so this is where my mind is. But you think to yourself, all right, I got to lift some weights, and what does that make me? That makes me healthier. And I think that competition is healthier. So I think that gives us everybody better options, and there can't be anything wrong with that.
Cool, right on. Well, I think we've given a great overview of the selling points about Bitcoin. I hope people are convinced by now.
Check out our next video. Thanks very much. Leave us any questions and comments in the show notes below, and we'll see you next time.